Have you ever wondered why, just when things begin to go well, you pull back? Why you delay the call, skip the meeting, ruin the relationship, or talk yourself out of the opportunity? You tell yourself it's fear, or maybe laziness, but what if it's something deeper? What if the greatest obstacle in your life isn't failure or rejection, but the unconscious belief that you're not meant to thrive? That somewhere within you, there's a quiet resistance, not to hardships, but to happiness itself. Most of what governs your life does not sit within the bounds of your conscious awareness. You may believe you are making deliberate choices where you work, who you love, how you respond to situations, but beneath every action lies a deeper architecture made up of memories, emotions, inherited beliefs, and instincts. This architecture is not visible to the naked eye. It is stored within the unconscious, that vast interior world where forgotten experiences and unspoken truths reside, and it is here, in this shadowed realm, that the seeds of self-sabotage are planted. From childhood, you are shaped not only by what you're taught, but also by what you feel in environments that lack safety, love, or clarity. These impressions form the earliest layers of your unconscious reality. When you are punished for expressing anger, you learn to repress it. When you are ignored when crying, you learn that vulnerability brings abandonment. These responses are not choices, they are survival adaptations. But over time, they solidify into patterns, and once they are encoded deeply enough, they operate without your awareness. Like an unseen hand steering the wheel of your life, these unconscious patterns influence how you see yourself, what you believe you deserve, and how you behave under pressure. Let us consider a person who constantly procrastinates on their creative work. On the surface, it may appear they simply lack motivation or discipline. But if you were to go deeper, beyond the surface narrative, you may discover an unconscious belief that says, if I fully express myself, I will be rejected or ridiculed. This belief, rooted in a past experience long forgotten, still governs behavior. The conscious mind wants to move forward, but the unconscious mind fears exposure, humiliation, or abandonment, so it slows progress, sabotages efforts, and avoids completion, not out of malice, but to protect the individual from pain it believes is inevitable. The tragedy is that most people never realize they are being ruled in this way. They blame external circumstances. They shame themselves for their lack of willpower. But the truth is, until you become aware of the unconscious patterns guiding your life, you are not truly free. You are acting out scripts written long ago, often by others, often in environments that did not serve your growth. There is a certain irony in this. The part of us that claims to be in control, our conscious ego, is actually the smallest and most recent development of the psyche. It is like a rider on a massive horse, believing it directs the journey, unaware that the horse responds to unseen sounds, scents, and instincts that come from a place far older, far deeper. Until the rider learns to understand the language of the horse, he will always be pulled off course. These unconscious patterns are not just personal, they are also collective. They are shaped by your culture, your family history, even your ancestral wounds. You may carry burdens that are not even yours to begin with, acting out fears or limitations passed down through generations. And because they are hidden, they feel like truth, but they are not. They are simply unexamined agreements you made with life, often at a very young age. To break the cycle of self-sabotage, one must begin with awareness, not surface-level mindfulness, but a deep inquiry into the roots of your behaviors. What emotion are you avoiding? What belief are you unconsciously obeying? What old wound is being reactivated in this current situation? The answers to these questions do not arise from thought. They emerge from inner listening, from dreams, from moments of stillness and honesty that allow the unconscious to speak. And speak it will, not in words, but in patterns. Repetition is the language of the unconscious. When the same problems appear again and again, they are not obstacles, they are messages. They are mirrors reflecting back what lies unresolved within you. Until you decode these messages, the unconscious will continue to rule your life, and you will continue to call it fate. The shadow self is the collection of all the aspects of your personality that you have rejected, denied, or disowned over the course of your life. These are not necessarily evil or wrong qualities. They are simply the traits you have learned to hide in order to be accepted by others, to survive within your family system, or to fit into society's mold of what is deemed good or appropriate. The shadow might include your anger, your sexuality, your ambition, your selfishness, your creativity, or even your confidence. It contains everything you were told was too much, not enough, too strange, or too dangerous. And because these parts of you were never given space to exist consciously, they went underground into the unconscious mind, where they still live, waiting for acknowledgement. But nothing within the psyche disappears. What is repressed will always seek expression in one form or another. This is where self-sabotage enters the picture. When you continually reject certain parts of yourself, they begin to act out in subtle, indirect ways. They emerge not through conscious intention, but through behavior that feels irrational, impulsive, or contradictory to your goals. You may say you want intimacy, but push people away when they get close. You may crave success, yet constantly undermine your efforts. You may long for peace, yet find yourself repeatedly drawn into conflict. These contradictions are not failures of character. They are signs that your shadow is asserting itself. The psyche in its entirety longs for wholeness. It does not care whether a part of you is considered good or bad by society. It only seeks integration. And when one part is exiled, it will find a way to return. Often, this return takes the form of sabotage, not to ruin your life, but to force your attention inward. The sabotage becomes a signal that something within you has been neglected. It is not just behavior, it is communication from the unconscious. It says, see me, feel me, reclaim me. Take, for example, the person who grew up in a household where expressing anger led to punishment or withdrawal of love. Over time, they learned to associate anger with danger and rejection. To stay safe, they buried their anger. But anger does not vanish. It becomes passive aggression, self-criticism, or even chronic fatigue. It seeps into relationships, work dynamics, and inner dialogue. And because this person never consciously embraced their right to be angry, the suppressed emotion finds its outlet in indirect, often self-defeating ways. The sabotage is not random. It is rooted in a part of the self that has been silenced for too long. Similarly, someone who was praised only when they were helpful and selfless may have banished their desire for rest, pleasure, or personal ambition into the shadow. When these buried needs arise, they may be labeled as selfish or lazy and pushed away again. But eventually, the exhaustion will become unbearable. The resentment will build. Burnout, emotional withdrawal, or a breakdown may occur, not as failures, but as the psyche's desperate attempt to restore balance. The truth is, we all carry shadows, and the more unaware we are of them, the more power they have over us. We begin to project them onto others, blaming or idealizing those who reflect what we cannot accept in ourselves, or we act them out in ways that sabotage our own happiness. But the real root is always within. The parts we exile do not go quietly. They remain waiting, not to harm us, but to be reintegrated, to be brought back into the light of awareness, where they can finally serve us instead of disrupting us. Within the architecture of the human psyche exists a fundamental tension between two forces, the ego and the true self. The ego is the constructed self, the part of you that identifies with your name, your roles, your beliefs, and the image you present to the world. It thrives on order, control, familiarity, and validation. It is the gatekeeper of your conscious experience, trying to maintain stability by reinforcing the identity you've come to associate with safety and success. In contrast, the true self is vast, instinctual, and mysterious. It is not bound by the limitations of social expectations or conditioned responses. It holds your potential, your creativity, your desires for authenticity, and your drive toward transformation and meaning. It is the voice that whispers from within when you are quiet enough to listen, but often that voice is inconvenient to the ego's carefully constructed reality. The ego resists change. Its primary goal is preservation. It wants you to stay within the limits of what is known and comfortable, even when that comfort includes suffering, stagnation, or patterns of self-destruction. The ego would rather keep you in the predictable than risk the unknown. The true self, however, pushes toward growth. It seeks experiences that will awaken deeper layers of awareness, even if it means disrupting the ego's illusion of control. When this push from the true self meets resistance from the ego, an internal war begins, and this war often takes the shape of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is rarely a conscious act. It is the result of this inner conflict, a tug-of-war between the part of you that is trying to evolve and the part of you that is terrified of what that evolution might require. For example, you might be offered a new opportunity that aligns with your passions and purpose. A part of you feels excited, lit up, ready to leap, but then the ego intervenes, armed with doubts and fears. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if I'm rejected? These thoughts don't appear randomly. They are protective mechanisms deployed by the ego to prevent exposure to emotional risk. And if they persist, they can override your authentic desire, causing hesitation, delay, or even withdrawal from the opportunity altogether. This is how the ego protects the self-image, even at the cost of fulfillment. It would rather you stay in the roles and behaviors you've always known, even if those roles are outdated, limiting, or painful, because at least they feel safe. The true self, on the other hand, invites you to break free, to step into uncertainty, and to embrace the unknown. But it does not shout. It whispers, and its messages are often drowned out by the louder, more urgent voice of the ego. This conflict becomes particularly intense during periods of growth or transition. Whenever you attempt to stretch beyond who you've been, to start a new project, end a toxic relationship, move to a different place, speak your truth, you may notice resistance rising. Suddenly, you find yourself questioning your worth, retreating into old patterns, or sabotaging your own efforts. This is not weakness. It is the ego reacting to perceived danger. It is the unconscious attempt to preserve the identity that has kept you alive, even if it no longer allows you to fully live. What must be understood is that the ego is not the enemy. It has served a function, but its dominance becomes problematic when it blocks access to the deeper wisdom of the true self. To move beyond self-sabotage, you must learn to witness this inner conflict without judgment. You must see when the ego is driving your choices and when the true self is calling you toward expansion. Only through this awareness can you begin to negotiate a new relationship between the two, a relationship in which the ego no longer resists growth, but becomes a servant to the deeper call of the soul. At the core of human experience lies a deep and often hidden fear, not of failure, but of transformation. This fear is rarely acknowledged directly because it disguises itself in more acceptable forms: procrastination, self-doubt, perfectionism, excuses, distractions. These behaviors are usually interpreted as signs of weakness or laziness, but they are, in truth, protective mechanisms. They serve as buffers between the life you know and the life that demands your evolution. Transformation, real transformation, requires the death of an identity. It calls for the dismantling of your old stories, roles, defenses, and assumptions. It asks you to let go of the familiar, and that process, though liberating, is also profoundly threatening to the ego, which thrives on predictability and control. When you stand at the threshold of meaningful change, you are not just faced with a new beginning, you are faced with an ending. A part of you must die, perhaps the people-pleaser, the overachiever, the victim, the perfectionist, the one who stayed silent to be accepted, the one who always played it safe. These identities were crafted to help you survive, to help you belong, to help you feel worthy. But survival strategies become prisons when they outlive their usefulness. And yet, letting them go feels dangerous, as if stepping into the unknown might result in rejection, failure, or even psychological annihilation. So instead, you find ways to sabotage your progress, not because you are afraid of falling, but because you are afraid of becoming someone new. This fear often appears as resistance, and resistance becomes the silent architect of self-sabotage. You delay taking action, not because you don't care, but because the next step asks you to be someone you've never been before. You avoid difficult conversations, not because you're weak, but because speaking your truth would shatter a role you've inhabited for years. You cling to distractions or toxic habits, not out of ignorance, but because they anchor you to a version of yourself that feels safe in its familiarity. The resistance is not random. It is the psyche's way of guarding its current structure against collapse. What's most misunderstood is that transformation is not just about adding something new, it is about letting go. And letting go often feels like loss, even when what you are releasing no longer serves you. There is grief involved in growth. There is discomfort in healing. There is disorientation in becoming. The old identity doesn't vanish quietly. It resists, it fights, it whispers doubts into your mind. Who are you to change? Who do you think you are? What if you fail? These questions are not facts. They are echoes of a self that knows it's being left behind. This process of internal death and rebirth is not linear, and it cannot be rushed. It is sacred. But when you avoid it, when you back away from the threshold of change, self-sabotage becomes your companion, not as a punishment, but as a form of delay. As long as you fear transformation, you will unconsciously construct obstacles to protect yourself from the very evolution you long for. You will find yourself in repetitive cycles, convincing yourself you are stuck, when in truth you are paused. Paused in front of a door that only you can choose to walk through. And that choice requires courage, not to fight the fear, but to understand it, to honor it, and still move forward anyway. Human beings are deeply relational creatures, shaped not only by their individual experiences, but by the emotional echoes of early connections, particularly those formed in childhood. The way you were mirrored, held, criticized, or neglected in those formative years became the blueprint for how you now relate to yourself. These early attachments, whether secure or fractured, are internalized. They become the inner voice, the way you speak to yourself in moments of failure, the permission you give yourself to dream or to retreat. When a child is raised in an environment where love feels conditional, approval is inconsistent, or emotional needs go unmet, that child learns one core lesson: something must be wrong with me. This belief, once internalized, grows roots and matures into self-sabotaging behaviors later in life. What often appears as self-sabotage is actually self-protection, born from the emotional logic of a wounded inner child. The child who was told they were only lovable when they were obedient or high-achieving becomes the adult who constantly overworks but never feels satisfied. The child whose emotional expressions were met with dismissal becomes the adult who fears vulnerability and pushes people away, even when craving intimacy. The adult may look rational, composed, and successful on the surface, but beneath that exterior is a younger self still trying to make sense of an old wound. Why wasn't I enough as I was? This is where the roots of self-sabotage take hold, not in present-day failure, but in a misinterpreted past. The psyche, in its effort to maintain safety, continues to operate under outdated instructions. It does not distinguish between then and now. If vulnerability once led to punishment or shame, it will be avoided. If success once drew jealousy or abandonment, it will be undermined. If love once felt unpredictable, it will be feared. These inner dynamics are not consciously chosen. They are inherited emotional strategies, encoded long before conscious awareness fully developed, and they replay themselves in adulthood, often disguised as procrastination, perfectionism, or chronic self-doubt. Healing from these wounds does not mean erasing the past. It means reparenting the parts of yourself that were left unheard, unseen, or unloved. It means recognizing that the part of you who self-sabotages is not trying to destroy you, it is trying to keep you safe in the only way it knows how. That internalized child still believes the world is unsafe, that love must be earned, that being too visible will lead to hurt, and so it whispers messages that seem self-defeating but are, in truth, desperate acts of protection. Don't speak up, you'll be judged. Don't try too hard, you'll fail. Don't get close, you'll be left. Until these unconscious narratives are brought into awareness, they continue to shape your decisions and reactions. The child within does not need discipline, it needs compassion. It needs to be seen not as a saboteur, but as a guide pointing toward unresolved pain. Every act of sabotage is a signal, a flare from a younger self asking to be understood. When you begin to meet this part of you with empathy rather than judgment, the cycle begins to loosen. The grip of old conditioning weakens. You no longer have to live according to fears that belong to a different time. This is not a quick process. It requires patience, presence, and a willingness to feel what was once too painful to face. But in doing so, you begin to rewrite the script. You begin to trust that you are no longer that helpless child. You have the power now to choose a different path, to respond with consciousness rather than react from old wounds. And in doing so, you reclaim your agency from the hands of the past, no longer a prisoner of your early experiences, but the author of a new inner narrative. Self-sabotage often hides behind a veil of logic, cloaked in seemingly rational reasons and surface-level justifications. But beneath these justifications lies a much deeper truth, one tied to your sense of worth. There is an invisible ceiling constructed by your beliefs about what you deserve, and that ceiling is often built unconsciously. If somewhere along the line you internalize the belief that you are unworthy of happiness, success, love, or peace, then any experience that contradicts that belief will create discomfort. The mind, bound by its need for consistency, will attempt to resolve that discomfort, not by expanding your sense of worth, but by bringing your external life back down to match your internal narrative. This is where self-sabotage becomes not just a pattern of behavior, but a form of emotional self-regulation. You may want success, but if deep within you exists the belief that success is for other people, or that you are not good enough, then achieving it will feel incongruent. It will feel alien. The unfamiliarity of feeling truly seen, truly valued, or truly safe becomes more anxiety-inducing than the struggles you've grown accustomed to. So, rather than face the discomfort of growth, you unconsciously choose to retreat. You miss deadlines, you overthink, you pick fights, you shrink from opportunities, not because you lack ambition or potential, but because you are unconsciously trying to return to the emotional environment that feels familiar, even if that familiarity is rooted in pain. The need for emotional congruence is strong. You want your external world to reflect your internal world, even if that means staying in cycles that hurt you. If you believe, for example, that you are unlovable, you might sabotage relationships that begin to feel too intimate, too kind, or too generous, not because you do not want love, but because receiving it conflicts with your core belief about your value, and rather than challenge that belief, you dismantle the love. You find flaws, You test the other person, you push them away, and when the relationship falters, the belief is reinforced. See, I knew it wouldn't last. This becomes a loop that confirms your unworthiness, not because it's true, but because it feels familiar. Similarly, in the realm of achievement, self-sabotage often arises just as you begin to step beyond your perceived station. Maybe you start to gain momentum in your career or creative work, and suddenly resistance appears. You get sick, you lose motivation, you become consumed by doubt. These are not coincidences. They are psychological course corrections, guiding you back to the emotional climate you know how to navigate. If your self-worth is tethered to struggle, ease will feel wrong. If your worth is tied to scarcity, abundance will provoke guilt. You may not realize you're doing it, but every act of sabotage becomes a way to maintain emotional alignment with a version of yourself you have believed to be true. This is why mindset shifts alone are often insufficient. You cannot simply tell yourself you are worthy and expect transformation. That worthiness must be felt. It must be anchored in the body, in the nervous system, in your behaviors and your choices. You must learn how to receive the good without shrinking from it. You must sit with the discomfort of being seen, celebrated, chosen, not because it's dangerous, but because it's new, and you must meet the voice that says, "You don't deserve this," not with punishment or suppression, but with inquiry. Where did this voice come from? Whose voice is it really? What purpose did it serve? When you begin to examine your patterns through the lens of worthiness, everything changes. You realize your sabotage is not a flaw, but a signal. It reveals the edge of your comfort zone, the boundary of what you believe you're allowed to have. And when you cross that edge, not by force, but by gentle, conscious choice, you begin to rewrite the rules. You expand what is possible. You live not as a prisoner of your old identity, but as someone who can hold both fear and forward movement in the same breath. And in that space, worth is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you remember was always yours. The struggle with self-sabotage is not a sign that something is broken within you. It is a sign that something within you is asking to be seen. Every hesitation, every retreat, every pattern that repeats itself is not your enemy. It is a messenger, revealing where your wounds have not yet been touched with compassion. This is not a war to win, but a relationship to heal. Until you understand the parts of you that fear success, that resist love, that doubt your worth, they will continue to hold the steering wheel in moments that matter. But when you begin to meet those parts with honesty, patience, and care, when you choose not to abandon yourself at the edge of transformation, you begin to reclaim your life, piece by piece. Not by becoming someone new, but by remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And in that remembering, you no longer sabotage your path. You walk it, fully awake, fully alive, and finally, truly free.